So over the past 10 years, the number of self-employed women has increased by 24% compared to men having only increased by 1%. That gives us a fairly interesting picture of what's going on. And as Sandra pointed out earlier, women are leaving the corporate environment in unprecedented numbers. But the trend is not only happening here in Australia, it's happening all over the world. In 2010, 104 million businesses were started in 53 economies by women. Now, if you divide that, it's quite extraordinary. So we've seen from other developed economies that these sort of figures are continuing to grow. For example, in the US, who's probably the only developed economy that actually collects data, because here in Australia, as we've heard today, nobody has collected any data on small business women owners because, after all, well, they're only women and there's only about 1 million of them, so who really cares, right? And I guess the other point is that every business association in Australia is led by a man. So if you look at all of the chambers and the Business Council of Australia, the majority are men. I see that we have COSBO, a representative here. She's a woman, thank goodness. She's probably the only chair in the world, in the Australian world, that actually represents small businesses. So it's really interesting to see that nobody has ever collected any data, and the AWCCI research shows a little bit of what's happening. And it was that data that allowed us to start talking seriously with the federal government. So you probably know better than I that women have relied on men from an economic perspective for as far back as we can remember. And that, unfortunately, has led to the majority of women becoming socio-economically devastated, really, and the majority living in poverty. So our grandmothers and even some of our mothers before us had no option. Today, thank goodness, we do have options, thanks to the internet and thanks to the education that we have. People are pointing at the screen. What's wrong?
Sorry, I might have missed it. Is this Australian data?
This is Australian data. Everything that we've collected from the AWCCI, and this is all the research, is Australian. So we collected data from about 3,000 women, 2,992 to be exact, from rural, regional and urban Australia in every state and territory, from every industry. It was a voluntary online survey, so some purists have issues with that, but at least it gave us an overall perspective of what's going on, since nobody else bothered to look at it. The first point was that, as Sandra pointed out, 78% of women left their employment whilst they were at upper or middle management. So we know these women are intelligent and educated. 99% actually started their business after being an employee. So there's very few that take entrepreneurship up from university, straight out of university, but it is the first time that we're seeing that is occurring. So they don't want to be a doctor, they don't want to be an accountant, they want to be an entrepreneur. And I suspect that's going to continue growing as well. The annual turnover, as we can see on the screen, is quite interesting. So we saw from the previous one that 51% of women don't pay themselves a wage, and these are not just startups. These are women, some women had been in business for as long as 20 years and were now in a position, due to GFC or the fact that they were in retail or other, that they could not pay themselves a wage, let alone super. Data showed that less than 22% of women constantly or continuously pay themselves super. And I understand that's actually quite a high number compared to other data from people like Westpac and other interested groups. There was something that Dr. Carla noted before about why women are paid less. And I was actually quite shocked when I learned that today in Australia, if you're a man, you can get paid more just because of your height. So we've got this discrimination against short people and against women. So if you're a tall bloke, you're doing fine. If you're a short woman, you've got no hope. Look at me, vertically challenged. So overall, 51% of, I'll go to my data now. So overall, 51% of self-employed women said they do not pay themselves a wage. 42% of respondents started their business with $5,000 or less, and only 2% required more than $500,000 to start a business. They're the ones that are now employing 100 plus, and they're the 1% that either obtained the investment from a venture capitalist or an angel. Very small. And that part of that reason is because the majority of women, when they leave the corporate environment to start up their own business, go into service industries. No angel, no bank, no lender will lend you money if you're a service-based industry. And from memory, I think it was about 78% of women are in service-based industries in Australia. Interestingly enough, and rather logical in my view, the higher the investment at the startup phase, the higher the turnover and therefore the higher the income. Pretty logical. Furthermore, 51% of the respondents said that they now need capital to grow, but are unable to access that capital. 66%, as we've seen here, of respondents turnover less than 250,000, and that's actually quite an increase if we correlate that with ABS data, that it's almost double of what it was 10 years ago according to ABS. So we are moving forward, but it's only a majority, it's not the majority, unfortunately. So of the 49% that do pay themselves a wage, it's interesting to note that the small amount that pay themselves only 10 grand or less are perceived to be hobbies. And one of the things that really gets me going is when you see the reaction, especially from the men, when they speak to a woman, they go, oh, so you run your own small business? Yes, and I run it from home. So 49% of women run their business from home. Oh, right. And you can see the thoughts going through their little heads going, oh, it's just a hobby. If it's a bloke and they say, oh, I've got a company and I run it from my garage, mate, you're going to be the next Steve Jobs. So it's interesting to note that there's these preconceptions that if women work from home, it's a hobby, and if men work from home, they're going to be the next big thing. And we all know here that that's not actually true. So just to wrap up, in order to assist women, we at the AWCCI are running 3 campaigns. And when I say assist women, this is all based on getting women to be able to be more financially independent. One of our current campaigns is the childcare campaign. We've been very successful with that. We got both the coalition and the government to provide some promises. The coalition have said that they will do a productivity commission inquiry. I met with Tony Abbott and Susan Ley, the childcare minister, and she claims that they'll have it done within 6 months if they get in. I don't know about the research people. I'm not quite sure if 6 months is viable or possible, but that's the promise. And as you all probably know, Mr Rudd promised $450 million to increase the childcare prior or before and after school care, which is highly important because I don't know many women that work the same hours as the children are in childcare, unfortunately. So that's one of the campaigns. The other one is the Give Us an F campaign, which has been had a soft launch, but we'll be doing the major launch at the end of next week when we know what politicians are back in place. And that's literally to collect data. So we have great agencies like WGEA collecting data about the pay equal issue within the corporate environment. But the government state that they do not collect data on the procurement of contracts. So last year, a media release was handed out by Penny Wong and Mark Arbib, who was Small Business Minister for a blink. And they claimed that they were so proud that they had been able to provide $49 billion worth of contracts to business. $9 billion of that went to SMEs. I'm going, this is fabulous. We're going to end poverty amongst women in no time if they keep starting up their business. Wrong. Penny, what's the breakdown? Oh no, we don't collect that data. I said, really? But there's a mandate for Indigenous and there's a mandate for disabled. How is it possible that you don't collect that data? Oh yeah, there is a mandate and there's an IPO, but no, we don't collect the data. So I walked out of that meeting literally in tears because I thought, she's a woman, she's finance, she should get it. She didn't get it, or so I thought. Luckily though, 5 days later I received a phone call from the head of procurement in Canberra. He said, Minister's told me to give you a call, we need to sort this out. A year and a half later, we're still talking about it. Now they're telling me that unless there's legislation passed, they're not going to be able to provide that data. So the point is that if we don't collect the data, we can't advise on policy. If we don't advise on policy, there's not going to be any changes. If there's $9 billion worth of federal government contracts, we want women to get a slice of that pie. It's only logical. In the US, there's already been a mandate. It was introduced in 1990. It says that 5% of all federal government contracts must go to women business owners. They're only up to 4.1 as of November last year, but at least they're going somewhere. Here in Australia, as I said, we don't even collect the data, so we can't even start screaming or crying about getting legislation changes. The second one is contracts for women. So it's part of the Give Us an F campaign, really, but we're also now targeting industry. And I've spoken to Elizabeth Broderick. Hello, Alison. And we've done a presentation on this just recently at the COSBOA National Australia Bank Summit. And that is, we know women are leaving the corporate environment, right? They're educated. It makes sense then to give them contracts. But they don't. I had one corporate, and I'm happy to share who they are in private. After 2 years of conversations about them setting targets to start giving women contracts, she said to me, oh, Yolanda, women just aren't trendy at the moment. I said, what? She said, yeah, we've got targets for Indigenous, but women just aren't trendy. So girls, we got to get trendy. It's taken women on boards 10 years to be heard. I hope it doesn't take us 10 years for some policy and some legislation and some educational issues to be addressed. Otherwise, we're going to have another 1 million women living below the poverty line in this our lucky country. So I guess my call to action at the end of this presentation is to ask you just one simple thing. If we want women to increase their pay, you need to start buying from women. Thank you.